Really can't wait till we can see everybody in person again. Can I just tell you, I'm having one of those days. It's just so happy to see you all here today. Let's go ahead. I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Motion's been made by Mr. Raw,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Harvey. Do we have to have a roll call for adopting the agenda? Okay, let's do it.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
She's absent.
Board Member Raw,
Aye.
Board Member Talcott,
Absent still.
Board Member Miyakawa. Oh,
Aye.
Mrs. Lindsay just joined.
Ms. Lindsay, we've had a motion to adopt the agenda. Do you want to?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Velma.
Mhm.
All right, let's go ahead with our Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands, one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty and
liberty and
justice.
justice for all.
I finally had to go out and buy myself a little flag that I stick in a vase instead of, like, I think I've used a book that had a flag on it in the past and trying to get it all
I have a
marked
flag
up.
away out in the pasture and I just face the pasture.
That works, but I didn't have one of those. So very good. Well, now we all have a mental image of Mrs. Lindsay turning towards her pasture.
Holly is trying to text somebody.
Oh, she is? She told me that she was going to be 5 minutes late, so I knew about that. I didn't get a text. I don't know. All right, let's go ahead. I'm just going to go ahead and turn the budget study session over to Mr. Frederickson.
Alrighty,
Just real quick, Jennifer, do we go to the one we got just a few minutes ago? Or do we go to the one that we got last Friday?
The one what?
I
Handout?
sent out another attachment. Do we go to, which attachment do we go to?
That one, if that's COVID funds, that would go for the regular
okay.
board
That's
meeting.
nothing, that has nothing to do with this.
Yeah,
one.
not
Okay.
the special board meeting. Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
alrighty. Well, good evening, and it is nice to see you all. Again, I agree with you. I'm looking for time to be all in one room, and for us as a cabinet and leadership team, this is the first time we've not all met in the boardroom. So we're all in separate offices as well. So be patient with us as we try to communicate. Usually we can look at each other, and on this we'll just have to look at each other on the screen. But yeah, I'm looking forward to tonight's budget study. I think we've gotten some new information over the last month that can give us a little further guidance, although we're still waiting. But I looked at the work that Lizette has done, and I'm looking forward to us reviewing the things that she's done. But you want to go ahead, Lizette?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Frederickson. Yes, good evening. I'll be taking us through our update. And I wanted to kind of, I was looking back and just doing a little recap for myself because time just flies. And I don't know about you, but I can't always trust the memory of exactly what happened when. So this is our third budget study session. I think we've been having a lot of great conversations and just doing some preliminary discussions and planning as we prepare for the budget adoption cycle. And so we had our first study session October 6th when we looked at, as we closed the books for the 1920 year, and we looked at some multi-year projection scenarios at that first study session. And then December 15th, we had a second study session when we had our first interim update, a new update and information looking at the current 21-22 school year and what that looked like. And we looked at two updated multi-year projection scenarios at that point, which was the first one was A, and that was pretty much as is what we were presenting through first interim. And then scenario B was, we discussed restoring everything that had previously been implemented in reductions for 21-22 and maintaining a 10% reserve. So that was a 10% reserve in the unassigned fund balance. So that was scenario B. So then today, as we come together and look at one more scenario, and that's why I labeled it scenario C to just continue on that conversation. This is the multi-year projection where I essentially took that scenario B, which was restoring everything and maintaining a 10% reserve, and included updates with, as Mr. Frederickson mentioned, the new updates from the January governor's budget, which has its proposals and really our first big look at what we build our typically what we build our budget assumptions on as we plan for next year's budget. So I'm going to share my screen here with that scenario C that I discussed. Okay, can you all see that there? All right, let me just reposition a little bit so that I can try to see you and as well as the screen a little bit. Okay, well, that's not working. I'm going to move it
Lizette,
over
is
here.
that the one you sent us that we can look at on our own computers?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So yeah, if you make sure you have the right one, here at the top right, it'll say scenario C, January governor's budget plus 3.84% COLA. So that is by far, obviously, the biggest change to this scenario and is a large impact as we look at what the governor's proposal would do going forward to the 21-22 school year. And I discussed it in some of my most recent Friday updates, but this was definitely a change of events and looking forward and not what we had been anticipating or discussing up to that point. We were potentially talking about additional reductions coming our way, possibly flat funding, as in some of our minds, I think, as a possible best case scenario as we look forward. But lo and behold, as I talked about, revenues in our state are outpacing what was projected, and meaning that not only for the 2021 year, our current year, but also for 21-22, then the governor put forth a proposal that indicates the COLA in each of those 2 years. So starting here at the very top of this, you see here in red, and I'm highlighting it here, hopefully you can see that on the screen, a 2.31% COLA in the current 2021 year, and then a 1.5% COLA in the 21-22 year. Both of those together represent what you hear out there and what I've shared with you in terms of a cumulative compounded COLA of 3.84%, which would be applied and would be coming our way in the 21-22 year through our LCFF funding. So that is the number that is in the governor's proposal, and that is why on this line here in red, you see 21-22 LCFF 3.84 cumulative COLA, which is for both of those years. And then in the 21-22 year, you see here in red, I've illustrated the impact of that, and that would be an additional 2.7 million of revenue in the 21-22 year. And then if we assume that would remain flat in the year after that, that would be an additional 2.7 in the 22-23 year. That's not saying 2.7 and then another 2.7. That's just saying that 2.7 would hold if we are assuming flat funding after that point. So that is by far, like I said, the biggest change as we look at the governor's budget proposal and what is out there at this point in time. Again, based on the large change in the revenues that have come through the state in this current year, and has positioned the state budget in a better place than what was projected in the Budget Act that was passed. And I talked a little bit through that in the Friday update, but I'll just reiterate that comes as the state's revenue stream relies heavily, heavily on personal income tax. And because in the pandemic, our high income earners, which are our largest contributors to our personal income tax in the state of California, have fared well through this pandemic in terms of economics. That is why we are seeing the state's position be better and the governor come out with a much more favorable proposal than anticipated for the 21-22 year. Again, that's all as of what we have as of this point in time. As we know, that is subject to change, but as we work through budget development and that process, the January governor's budget is our starting point as we work on presenting those scenarios on those numbers. So then as we scroll down to the next section here.
Can we ask questions about each section, or do we have to wait till the whole thing?
I'm open to however you would like to proceed.
Jen,
Mrs.
how do you want
Miyakawa.
to do it?
That's fine, Cindy, go ahead.
Okay, I have a real concern about one. Could you scroll back up to where you were? I have a huge concern about the fact that we would base a budget on 2 years to begin with. And secondly, we don't even know what's going to happen in this recall, what's going to happen with this governor. To base a budget on what happened, may have happened in 21, 22, we don't know. And I just feel I feel that it's almost misleading to add them together and try to put out a 3-point something, because that's not accurate. You don't even know that that's a fact. You're guessing what's going to happen in next year. And you can say those are projections, but I mean, really, if you look at the past 2 years, certainly isn't where we've been. So I just have a problem that us just accepting this wholeheartedly, that this is going to be the COLA. I don't believe it is. I believe that COLA is going to be much closer down to zero like it was, or pretty close to zero like it was this year. And it worries me for you to say that the big businesses are fared well, because they didn't. Lots of them are leaving the state. I don't think big business fared well at all. They're I don't know where you're getting that fact from. So
So
could you
Mrs.
explain some of that?
Can I just clarify in the fact that this isn't any different than any other budget year where we're taking January government projections and starting the budget discussions for the coming year?
I
That's what
realize
we're
that,
doing.
but it just seems like these are really, really high numbers for us to even start out at. I think we need to be a little more realistic and be a little more, logical than to just grab figures out of the air and say, we're looking at a 3-point, almost a 4-point COLA. That does not ring true to me at all.
I understand where your concern is coming from, Mrs. Lindsay. And I think I'll just echo a little bit of what Mrs. Miyakawa was saying, in that it is our practice and the practice of school districts statewide to use the January governor's budget proposal as really our first big indicator of what the administration of the state is proposing, and how that would affect our budgets. And part of that also will be what we, as we move forward in this process, and what we include in our budget assumptions that will be brought forth to the board. That will be one of the factors that is listed in that document. If you remember, it's a large document that we bring forth for the board to adopt those assumptions for us to work towards. So I think at that point in time, we can also continue to discuss that and see if we have new information coming our way. But at this point in time, that's the information we are receiving from all of the sources that we rely on in terms of our figures and data to begin building our budget.
Okay, I'll go along with that, but I think it's really naive of us to think that's where it's going to be, because the Senate just turned down his bid for 2 billion, I think, for in COVID money. And I don't think they're going to support him on what he's coming out with. Even the Democratic Party itself is turning away. And so I think we need to keep a little closer eye on what's happening in the relationship with the party and the unions. And because I'm afraid if we put that 3 point something out there that we're starting to negotiate with that, it's going to look really ugly when we drop down to a zero COLA.
Yeah, and then I can
Understood.
interject a little bit too. Again, listening to like capital advisors and the different, consultants we have. Again, I think the revenues that are projected seem to be pretty realistic. I think the big concern is going to be that following year. And that's the one that they're not, they're wondering how the prolonged effect of the pandemic is going to be on the following year as well. But also when we look at the list of possible reductions, we can keep those in mind when we start to look at this, base it on this COLA, based upon that advice, but know, to address your concerns, be a little conservative and know that we have in our back pocket that list of reductions that as we get closer to May, and again, even as we negotiate, we'll keep that in consideration. We'll be conservative and be sure to know we, need to wait until closer to May to get the numbers.
Okay, well, I sent you that big article about how they rejected all of that money he was projecting out there. And I have a feeling that's going to happen again.
Yeah, and I think some of that, and we'll talk more about it, I think a lot of that is that one-time money. And that's, that's like we've dealt with that COVID money this year, and that's helped a little bit as we've tried to look at some of the costs that that were COVID related, but were impacting our general fund. And so we were able to cover some of those costs and generate some savings. And I think we even talk about that in our budget assumptions and possible reductions as well. But I think what, some of the monies that the federal governments look at is that one-time COVID relief funding. And I don't think it's the based upon the COLAs from generating revenue.
I understand, Eric, but my point being is we've already gone into the general fund to cover COVID, and we're depending on that COVID money to clean that up. And right now, the state of California has rejected his proposal to give that money out. So we're already into the general fund. So it makes me nervous when we go out there with that kind of a high COLA and say to the community we're basing it on this high COLA when it's just not happening.
Okay.
Okay, I'll shut up now. Thank you.
No, I think we discussed, as we go forward, we can continue to have those discussions and keep those things in mind as we build our budget assumptions. So moving on into the expense section, this has not changed too much, and these blue line items here are the items that we had in the previous scenario in which we are restoring the reductions that we previously implemented in the 21-22 year. I'm sorry, the 2021 or current year. So restoring those into the budget as costs for future years and kind of going back to a clean slate, if you will. And then the red numbers have changed here as a result of the added revenue at the top. What we used to have here in terms of reductions necessary in order to what I've referred to as quote unquote balance the budget, which basically is to leave us at that 10% unassigned reserve that is the board goal. We went from about a $5 million reduction to about a 2.2 million reduction here, 2.3 if I round up, in the 21-22 year, and if things held, would be an additional about 1.2 million to bring us to a total of 3.5 million in that second year in 22-23. And then right above that is just a little bit of an adjustment, not much, but I wanted to still show that a reduced cost of STRS and PERS that was also part of the governor's proposal. So because of these added revenues, this projection is indicating that in order to achieve the board goal of a 10%, we would be needing to reduce about 2.3 million instead of what we were previously discussing of about 5 million. So favorable news in terms of that, but as we discussed, there are caveats to the assumptions that we're making here. And we'll be mindful of those and continue to stay updated on all the latest information coming out. And then down here in the bottom section, as you are familiar with, I'll just show you here in the red arrows, it shows overall when we look at our revenues minus our expenses, where are we at? Are we at a deficit, or do we have an increase in our fund balance? In the 21-22 year, we would be looking at a deficit of about just over 300,000. And the next year, we would have turned that around and be looking at a excess or adding to the fund balance about 175,000. Both of those would get us to the goal of achieving a 10% down here in the blue arrows, 10% unassigned reserve, plus the additional 3% that we have for economic uncertainties for a total of 13%. So that's the overall MYP picture on as we look at the unrestricted funds and the impact of the January governor's budget. I'll move on, unless there's any other questions at this point, I'll move on to the other document that
I have one more question.
Yes.
If you go back up to benefits, I believe it's retiree benefits, or let's see, where is it? They're at the top line there. Let's see, there it is. What's it called? Yeah, employee benefit. No, not employee benefits. Where is it? I'm sorry. Oh, it's the STRS and PERS. You're thinking, or you're adding that money in that the governor's giving us. That's where you're seeing that big drop in the amount. Is that where you're adding it in?
The red number here, the minus 27,000 in the 21-22 year.
No, up on the line that says STRS and PERS.
No, that remains unchanged from what we had projected before. That's just our regular cost that we have projected for STRS and PERS. So I didn't change any.
But it's changing from 966 to 510 to 405. Those are big changes in each year. And a reduction.
So the STRS is changing according to the STRS projected rates that have been released, and so in the STRS there's actually a little bit of a decrease in the rate, and then I believe you see it pick up again in that 22-23 year. You see it goes back up to 6,114,000. That's all based on the projected STRS and PERS rates. On the PERS side, you'll see that number just continually goes up from 1.389 to 1,649,000 to 1,009,000 to 2.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
Again, all based on the projected STRS and PERS rates that are released along with every budgeted proposal update, or anytime STRS and PERS updates those rates.
Okay, I just wondered if that was the money he was proposing to put back in. So, okay,
no,
thank you.
The amount it's just the 27 and the 33 small amounts, because there's like a 0.5%. They're not big changes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So looking at the second attachment, this is the list we also have been looking at and continue to modify and bring to you. And so you'll notice I have some changes from the last time, again, to line up with our updated scenario. Here, I've changed this to approximately 2.3 million of reductions that we would be looking at to match to our MYP scenario. And then I've also in this column started to add some comments and considerations as we've been having discussion in cabinet and in our executive meetings as well, as we look at some of these things for the board to consider. And also, as we heard some of the feedback from the board at the last study session, part of the direction was to go back and two things that I specifically noted, to go back and look at how we could utilize some of the one-time funds that we are anticipating coming our way. And I'll be sharing that update in our regular meeting with a large portion of additional one-time funds that were passed as part of the federal stimulus package. And also looking at an expanded list of reductions, particularly ongoing reductions, and going back to some of the work that was previously done in 0809 and 910, and looking at budget reductions. And so went back and did that, and bringing back some additional information and things to add to this list, and just share with the board the information, and continue having the discussions. So here at the top, with the very first line, we've been talking about these 2 PD days, which were an MOU with SEA, and part of the notes that we added here as we talked about the applicability of being able to use COVID funds. The consideration here would be that we could utilize COVID funds for this, and helping mitigate learning loss as we look at these 2 PD days, these 2 professional development days for staff, and specifically teachers. So that would be a place where we would offset that, and instead of charging to a general fund, we would utilize COVID dollars for that. As we look at the next 2 lines of positions, Director of HR and 2 assistant principals, also in working towards mitigating the effects of COVID, which we are working with and will continue to work with, we know, we would propose to possibly utilize COVID funds for the next 2 years. And we have another 2+ years of COVID funds. And then possibly that 3rd year out, we would need to move that back into the general fund. So
How can we do that, Lizette? I thought you told us last time we could not use these for salary.
We can use them for salary. It just depends on what the reasoning is for using them for salary. And the other thing is that this next round of funding that we're using, remember the other funds that we were working on using, that had specific rules and regulations. One of the biggest ones, well, there were several of them, but one of the ones that really impedes you to kind of be able to help do some of this work that we would be proposing is that you cannot, you can't supplant. So you can't, if you were already paying something with general fund dollars, you can't take it out and then charge it against the COVID funds. Well, these new funds that are coming our way do not have any prohibition to be able to do that. We can supplant and trade out what would have previously been general fund dollars, and the wording on these, the allowability of the use of these new funds is a lot more broader and wider in terms of mitigating COVID effects, and it also expands into even a few other areas such as facilities and just air sanitation and those types of things. So there's a lot more flexibility with these new funds.
And I'd like to just take a minute. Board members, if you could, at this point, as she's going through this sheet, if you would just jot down any questions you have at the end of her reviewing this whole sheet, then I'm going to give everybody an equal chance to ask questions. I'm sure some of the ones that you have, other board members will have, but I'd like to give everybody an equal opportunity to ask questions. So if you wouldn't mind just holding those questions till the end of her going through this, in the interest of time, that would help. Thank you.
So this next section here is the section that you're familiar with, some of the set-asides and other board line items that we have discussed, really non-personnel type reductions. And so this first one, added a note here for the OPEB fund, that set aside. If we consider leaving this reduction, this would be one that is most distant impact in terms of program and operation. So that's a consideration we added here to discuss. And then as opposed to the other two for bus replacement and deferred maintenance, these are things that are, obviously more directly connected to our operations, possibly with upcoming bus needs and facility needs. So if we were to take an approach of leaving these in, it would be looking at not an all or nothing, but considering what the impact of each of these different types of set-asides have for our total overall operations. The next three line items, field trips, sixth grade camp, travel conference, and new induction enrollees. All of these, I just made a note that these would be the second year in a row of this reduction for the board's consideration. Safety funds, this is a one that we had on here, and I made a note that most of our safety efforts at this point in time are focused around COVID, as you heard us discuss and seen the presentation that we recently brought to you. And so we would propose the utilization of COVID funds for these. The next line is a new one, which in looking at what we could possibly use COVID funds, but we have used COVID funds already in the funds that we used through December. This was one of them, and it was a large line item. So that I added here for your consideration. And this is our ARES communication system. Similar to some of the other line items, we could propose utilizing COVID funds for 2 years, and then that third year out, moving over to the general fund. So allows us some time to gradually work on building in and working with other reductions as well. And then this next section is line items that were already here, just as we look at reductions in force or other workday salary. This is just a number that is representative of what would be equivalent of 6 days or up to 3%. And we've updated that number to be a calculation of what we have in our current budget now. So just over 3.1 million, and that obviously requires negotiations for anything of that nature. And we added a new line item as we've been having discussions of other things, attrition savings, as we look at staff that is retiring, staff that has resigned and is moving on, what savings we have from those. And that is a very conservative estimate at this point, based on the notices that we have right now, obviously subject to change. And I can just share, for example, last year we had savings in this category of over 500,000. So this is, like you can see, a very conservative estimate of potential savings that we would have. The next line item we've talked about is if we looked at reducing our reserve board goal from 10% to 9%, that would be about 920,000. I made a note, it's one-time savings because you can only use that up once. And then I also made a note that we have an additional minimum reserve of 3%, and that meets the state minimum requirement. The next section is looking at the fund balances, and just made a few notes on those. The first one for textbook, noting that these would be needed for future adoptions according to the current requirements looking forward. And then the others, I just made notes that these would be one-time use and one-time savings only. If we were able to even utilize some of these, we would have to take a look and see. But I know that was some of the least favorable discussion that we had last time, but I just made a note on those. And then down here in the bottom, this is a brand new section that I added, and so I kept it separate and I labeled it really other reductions as we went back to looking at the work that was done in 2008, 2009. Well, the work was probably done in 7-8, but I'm looking to implement in the 8-9 and 9-10 budgets. There was a extensive document with many line items. Some of it, honestly, for example, travel conference was one of the items that we already have up above that we've been discussing and implemented in the current year. That was in that other document, so I didn't list it down here as well since we already have it. And in that document, for example, the travel conference was broken down into all the different areas of travel conference for the board, travel conference administrative. So while it was multiple line items to consider, we're grouping it here as a whole in our discussions. But all these others are, like I said, brand new ones. These are just listed purely as information and discussion for the board to have as we look at what did we do in the past and what things did we consider for reductions in the past. As you see, we have numerous items ranging from many of the different stipends to musical instruments, advertising, different types of supplies and equipment, library books, and custodial supplies. And so off to the side here, I just made notes of what would require negotiations, obviously anything personnel related. And then on some of the ones where we feel that we could possibly use COVID funds for perhaps a portion of these as we look forward into the next year or two, we could look at the possibility of doing that. So I think that is all the information I have in terms of just pointing out what's changed, what's updated for the board to discuss and consider as we move forward. The only other point, and I know we're going to go into discussion and board questions, is then discussing these and sharing with you that as we move forward in the budget adoption process, our next steps would be looking at the February 23rd meeting, bringing forth to the board the draft budget assumptions document that that you were probably familiar with, a 10-12 page document that will list all of the assumptions that we would be working with as we build the budget, as well as the budget calendar that outlines the time frame from February all the way through budget adoption in June. So we would be bringing that for the board as a first draft to the February 23rd meeting. Okay, so I'm happy to take board questions.
Thank you, Lizette. Appreciate that. That was one of my first questions is, as we ask questions right now, what's our timeline looking for? So I'm going to go just across what shows on my screen and give everyone a few minutes to ask whatever clarifying questions they need. Keep in mind it's 5:38. So if you have some real ones that you feel like a conversation with Lizette at another time would be advisable, then I would ask you to do that. But let's just go through and see what clarifying questions we might have. George, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. I submitted 3 questions in preparation for this meeting. I don't know if you just want to answer those 3 or you want me to restate the 3 questions that I had in preparation. I'm looking for answers to those to determine when our potential reduction list will be complete, and then on what date do we need to make the final decisions on which reductions we will be implementing in the budget. So did you need me to state those or did you just want to answer them?
I have them in front of me. I could just
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'll state the question and then the answer as we had worked on these when you submitted them here this afternoon. So the first question: has every position in the district been evaluated to determine its level of necessity as we go through a cost-cutting process to balance the budget? And the question is not specifically. However, we're always monitoring our staffing in order to look at what our base program is and the needs of our students. And also, as positions become vacant, we're evaluating the necessity of filling those positions. And we'll continue doing that and working through that process as we work on the budget development process and also the budget assumptions that we'll be bringing before the board. The next question is, has every budget line item in the district budget been evaluated to determine its level of necessity as we go through a cost-cutting process to balance the budget? So this is, the first one was referring to positions. This is budget line items. And the approach we took was, I talked about it a little bit, going back through prior years and looking at what reductions had been proposed and which ones of those were still applicable in our current budget. Some of those things we no longer have, or what some others that maybe we do have that we didn't have listed. So we did that, as well as we, again, continue to work on the process and bring you budget assumptions, we can continue to look at identifying items to bring before the board to consider. And then the last one is in that similar realm, but has every department in the district been asked to thoroughly review their budget to determine if any cost savings can be achieved in the respective departments. So again, the answer is no. However, we have had numerous discussions in both our cabinet and executive meetings to just talk about what potential areas we can have savings. But as we begin this this budget assumptions and drafts that we bring to the board, that's part of the process. We all work through on this document, and usually if it's in good times where we're growing and seeing some potential where we can do that, departments will bring forth their proposals of things that in terms of what the needs are, what programs, and what things we can add into the budget perhaps. And this time it will be a different discussion, and we're talking about, obviously, we need to look at what we need to do to balance our budget. And so what areas can each of the departments look at in order to identify areas of savings? And so we'll be going through that process and begin to give you information as we bring forth the budget assumptions.
Okay, so I guess I appreciate you answering the questions. My concern with some of the answers is that unless we bring the whole district together as a group to make these reductions, then there could be some possibly hurt feelings along the way as why is my group getting picked on and another group not getting picked on, when my purpose in writing the 3 questions was not to add to a workload for anybody, but to show a pattern of equity across the district, to not just go to previous year's reductions, but to look at the district at a whole, whether it's personnel, whether it's individual budgets or department budgets, and determine, can everyone take a little bit of the pain of a reduction rather than just going after one particular lump sum. It's easier for us to say, ooh, there's 300,000. That's a good chunk. Let's whack that one, rather than saying, well, we can take a little bit from that one, but if we also took a little bit from someplace else. So I'm just looking for a process of equity. On the day that you're going to ask us to make the reductions, I just want to make sure that everyone feels that they were heard and that everyone was treated equitably. So that was the purpose of my 3 questions.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raw. Ms. Harvey.
We can't hear you.
Sorry.
Oh, now we can hear you.
We had you.
Oh, nope.
Do you want to text them to me and I'll read them off for you? Okay, we'll go around. Ms. Talcott.
I don't have any clarifying questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Lindsay. Can't hear you.
Mute. So
There you go.
we had we were told last year by the governor that January, February, March, or maybe February, March, April, May, and June were going to be deferral months of money for salary. What are we doing about that? Because is that happening? Are we addressing that in this budget? Are we looking at how we're going to repay that money to, I know that we are going to owe that money and we're having to wait for it. So have you done anything thinking about that, Lizette?
So yes, the governor's proposal, well, let me start with this year. This year, the deferrals are happening. The deferrals are happening starting this month, actually, month of February.
Right. Okay.
Will be the first month, February through June, that we will be deferred. And so this month or this year we did that a cash flow projection. We're monitoring the cash flow projection, and if you recall, we brought forth to you it was a resolution and a document to submit to our county office, in which our county treasury will cover those months when we have the need to need some additional cash. If according to projections, we would need that from the county treasury in order to pay our bills, pay our payroll. So based on all of the projections and where we are now, which we are a little bit ahead of our projections in terms of having a little bit more in the bank versus what we projected, well, that's definitely a good thing. We will be able to get through and do what we need with that. I think they called it bridge loan from our county treasury. And so we would be doing that to get us through June.
But we have to pay it back.
Correct. So for next year, part of the governor's proposal is that those cash deferrals would be paid. And in addition to that, we would receive our regular money that we should be receiving. So for example, in the month of July, we should normally receive what we receive in July. If we're due, let's just say $1 million in July, we receive that $1 million. And if we were owed $2 million, let's just say from June, that we were deferred, we would also receive that in July. So we would receive a total of $3 million in July. So that is the proposal. That is a
I
proposal.
understand all that. I understand all that.
Okay.
My concern my question to you is, assuming that does not happen, assuming that that money does not come through, which there's a great chance, what are we doing to prepare to cover those deferrals, that deferral cost that we're going to have to pay back to the county? Are we looking at that?
What we have to pay to the county is just some negative interest on amounts that we are overdrawn. So if the county, and it's just based on our low interest rate of what is right now what is generated. So that would be covered, and we would be able to cover that with the money that we receive next year to pay that back to us. We would be taking that money and paying back the county what they let us borrow.
I understand that was that, but you're not hearing my question. My question is,
I'm not understanding.
you're assuming that we're going to get that money.
If we
You're
didn't get
basing
that
everything
money,
on that we're going to
Correct.
get that money.
that is correct.
I'm saying to you, what are we doing to think about not getting that money? Because we're going to be borrowing, we're going to go over. We know we're going to go over. We know we're going to have to bridge that money from the treasury of the county. We don't know how much, but you might, I don't. But where are we going to get that money? I mean, we really need, if this was my household and I was told that I was supposed to get this money, I would still be putting money aside just in case it didn't happen. And that's where I'm trying to ask you is, are we looking at that at all? Because I don't see it anywhere in the budget.
If we did not, we would have to look at going outside and getting an external loan from somewhere outside of the county. That would be the whole trans process of getting a third-party external loan. While I understand where you're coming from, us and many school districts throughout California would be in a complete bind because the state didn't come through and pay us what they said they're going to pay us. We have to rely on what the state is telling us that they're going to give us in terms of what's owed to us. They are our mainstream of funding, and if they don't deliver according to what they've told us, then I mean, all of the districts would be unable to pay their bills, and I'm not saying it's not possible, but that would be completely on the state. And the only thing we could do at this point in time would be, do we want to go out and look at securing an outside loan in case that happens? That would be an extreme measure, but that's not to say that, that's not
Okay.
the direction that the board would give to do that. But that's the
Okay.
direction the board would need to
You
give.
have a concept of how much that money will be every month. You'll kind of know how much we're going to have and how much we're going to need to get from that bridged money. Could you, at the next presentation, bring us the total amount for the 6 months and let us know how much that money would be? And is it feasible to begin to try to find a place to pocket that money away, just in case? It never hurts, because that just means you have that money somewhere else to use next September. If things don't happen and money doesn't start coming in, you will have money, already being put away. I'm just very, very leery about the financial situation of California right now. And I know we've always counted on it. I just want us to not be foolish and not think about it. So this has worried me a lot since the deferrals extended from 3 months to 6 months, and maybe they'll extend another amount next year. So if we keep getting into deferrals and we have to keep owing the county money, it's going to get deeper and deeper. We're going to get deeper and deeper. That's my concern.
Yeah.
And then my other question for you was the attrition.
Can you please make it quick? We're at 5:52
Yes.
and there's still 2 more board members with questions.
Oh, okay. Really quick on the attrition, you talk about that. Are you including the people that are retiring and being replaced? Or are you just talking about positions that you're not going to refill?
No, that would be somebody retiring and being replaced, and the average savings for that usual type of replacement.
So you're saying we would hire somebody at a lower salary than the person that's retiring, in essence?
Correct.
Is that always the way we do it, or is sometimes we take more veteran teachers?
Correct. Sometimes there's not as much savings. Sometimes there's more savings. So this is doing an average placement and what the savings would typically be.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Harvey?
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, good.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. My apologies. I saw a lot eliminate, and I'm wondering if we can also look at a percentage versus like taking all that and just, rather than eliminating it completely, taking a percentage off. That's kind of what I would like to see. Secondly, the kids have lost so much. I'm going to fight really hard to keep all the field trips in, or as many of them as we can, especially 6th grade camp. Again, the kids have lost so much. Let's give them the field trips. So that's the thing. And then on the bottom section, Lizette, where you did, Miss Aguilar, where you did all the adding up. Again, it was like, I can't remember it, but if you added it all up, it was around 1 million, right under 1 million. And again, I'm looking at maybe percentage versus line items eliminate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. Okay, I just have a couple quick ones. Some of mine have already been mentioned. Ms. Aguilar, you mentioned we still have 2+ years of COVID money. Could you clarify which years? Are you counting the 2021, or is that 21, 22, 22, 23? What are the 2+ years we have still coming?
21, 22, and 22, 23.
Okay.
Because the funding expires September of 23.
Okay, September of 23.
Correct.
Okay, and then you kind of answered earlier with Mrs. Lindsay's question on the director of HR and the 2 assistant principals. I just wondered if that was defensible. It seemed kind of a stretch to me to be able to use those, but I'm willing to listen to, as long as we can not only defend that, but also, make sure that it's sustainable when those COVID funds dried up, then that will need to be part of the discussion. And then let's see. The only other question I had real quick was those bottom line items that you'd plucked off from earlier years of cutting. I just wondered, looking at a few of the stipends, for things like athletic director, after school sports, Renaissance, those things that we weren't even able to have happen this year. What does that even mean? I mean, if we were to make cuts, would they be retroactive because those things weren't even possible during COVID because we had no after school sports and we had no, PE teams going on. And also, would you please look into where we're at with our musical instruments and supplies? I know we've had this in our budget for several years now. Have we gone through a full cycle of replacement and repair throughout all of our sites yet? To know if that, again, like both George and Christine were talking about, if we want to make sure we have equity and we haven't, replaced all the schools except for this one. I just kind of would like to know where we're at with that process that we set in motion several years ago. And that's the only question I have. You've already clarified that time-wise, we'll be looking at more, our next discussion would be on the February 23rd. And then is that the meeting where we'll start doing like what Christine said, saying, I'm not going to let this one go, where we as board members can fight for, what we want and what we, can bear with parting with.
I think that's where we would begin having those discussions. And then the next meeting after that, we would look to have some more, not finalized direction, but definitely some more specific direction from the board, because the September 23rd February 23rd will be your first look at it, talk through it. And so I want to give you that meeting to do that, discuss, and then that next meeting we can start to take some direction.
Okay, very good. Is there any other comments by either Ms. Aguilar or Mr. Frederickson before we wrap up this portion of our meeting?
Not for me, just thank you so much for all the information and just continuing to have these good discussions to plan.
Yeah, and again, and for me, I think the further we get into this, the more clarity I think we'll have. I know it's frustrating because I know it's important for you to have a list and get stakeholder engagement with that. We hear that, and and we'll respond to that. But I know as we get further through the spring, and again, we look at the largest portion of this budget is personnel. So when we start talking about equity and percentages, we just we'll approach it from that point of view. But you got to look at what percent of the budget does that stakeholder group have? And so, and what impact will we have based upon student enrollment? And again, what Lisette talked about with attrition and impact on that, because that's where a lot of the big dollars are. And I know, that list that was on the bottom, I think we need to dig deep and look at things, but it comprises such a small percentage of what the budget is. And so just know we'll have that in our thoughts as we work on this for the February 23rd meeting.
Thank you. And Ms. Aguilar, thank you for this. I think the more information that we have, the better our decision-making is. So I appreciate all the detail that went into this, this graph that you set up for us, knowing where we're at and where these cuts even came from and how long we've been doing them. And all these things help inform us because we don't live with these numbers and swim with these numbers like you do on a daily basis. So this constant reminder to us is very helpful. So thank you for the work that went into preparing these. Ms. Lindsay, you have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I know you said, Lizette, that we pretty much are focusing on COVID, on safety. I know we've talked seriously about the cameras at the other school sites. Could you possibly begin to build a budget that would show us how much we need to start putting aside to do that? And I know it's something that most of this board is in support of. So if I'm not sure it would go into this budget, but somewhere it needs to be built in that we're looking at that for future sites.
Some thoughts.
Thank you. I have a point of order question. Usually at this point, we would go into closed session, but since this is Zoom and we have a separate link for our open board meeting, do we need to jump onto that new link and open it and close it and go into closed session? Is that, Velma, Eric, do we? Or do we just go into closed session from here?
You will need to go to the other link.
Okay, so I need at least 3 board members to successfully get onto the other link. We'll open it and then we'll close it and go into closed session. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the discussion here. We'll see you on the
Thanks,
flip
Jen.
side.